Ah! Hi. I don't know why I always feel this like weird compulsion that whenever we start the stream, I just feel the need to just yelp.
You have to. It's always like a noise, or like
Mhm.
a noise, or an exclamation of some sort.
Exactly. I feel like it gets people pumped up, you know?
I think it's like because if you come here early and the tab's just in the background, and then all of a sudden you hear like a scream, and it just it really snaps you out of it, and you're ready to go.
Exactly. That's a very good point. Now, I do always uh observe in the chat there's almost always every single week or in a comment at some point someone saying, can you do the podcast at a different time because it's 3 in the morning, or someone here it was 2:26 a.m. And I mean, I wish that the time and date and shape of the planet were such that we could stream at a time that worked for everyone, but unfortunately not possible as such. So apologies.
Yeah, and it's funny because this was when we started it, and both of us were on the East Coast. It's 9 p.m. or I guess 8:50 on the East Coast, and that's good because it's like, what are you? It's like, what else are we going to be doing at 9 p.m. on a Sunday night?
Yeah.
Here now it's coming up on 6 p.m. So sometimes I got to plan around it a little bit, but I'm always happy to be here. So it's good.
Yeah, and I guess I think the sort of the thought process was this time slot, my audience is the largest subset. Actually, I guess I could go through this. The
Mm.
largest subset of my audience is on this hemisphere. Both, or even you could break that down into a quadrisphere. You know what I mean?
I've
Like if you split it above the equator and Europe, east of Europe, that sort of
uh-huh.
quadrant.
Okay.
It makes sense in my head. Don't worry about it. But I
Okay.
could tell you guys exactly, for 2022, about about 35% of my audience is from the United States. About 10% is from the UK, and then about 5% each for Germany and Canada. And so those are the biggest groups. I mean, 35% for the United States, and then it drops down to 10, and then 5, and then everything else is a small group. So this time slot, given that the East Coast has a 3-hour time differential, well, technically 5 if you count Alaska and Hawaii. But
Mhm.
even so, if it's effectively 9 p.m. when we start here, then the furthest uh, back in time that you would get would be in Alaska and Hawaii, and that would be what, 4 p.m. So it's like
Yeah.
it's a Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening for the most populous group of my audience, which is why we picked it out. Now, I am curious actually. Someone said what state has the most viewers? I actually don't know if I can break it down that granularly. Let me see. Oh, I can. That's actually very interesting. Okay.
Mm.
Let's have a little bit of a trivia sesh here. Top 5 states. We're talking 2022. Where do you guys think the uh in order from first to fifth, what are the states that watch my channel the most? Do you want to take a crack at guessing state number 1?
I feel like, see, if I'm gonna guess like this, I'm just going off of population or what I
Yeah.
think the population is. but I'm trying to think of the states that are the most populous. And I feel like is California number one, or is it one of the top ones?
Well, you, as well as about every single comment, are correct.
Okay, okay.
California is number one by no small margin. I should point out, of the total views, and I is that of my entire channel? No, that is just US views, I believe.
Hmm.
Let me double check that. So for 2022, yes. All right. So for 2022 so far, my channel has had 9.8 million views. 3.2 million of those are from the US, and 430,000 of those are from California. So 13% of my US views. That's a pretty
Okay.
big chunk.
Yeah.
I would say even outsize um to its population. So, you want to guess number 2?
I'm looking at the chat here. I see a lot of people are saying Texas, Florida, or New York as the next one. So I got to think for number 2. I think Florida's definitely got to be up there. So I'll go with that for number 2. I don't know.
You are not correct. Although a lot of
Oh,
people are throwing out the right states, but not necessarily in the right order.
okay, interesting. So Texas for number 2.
Ding, ding, ding. Correct. That is
Okay,
correct.
okay.
Now, number 3, not Florida.
Not Florida. I see a lot of people saying New York. Let's go with New York.
That is correct.
Okay, okay.
And then Florida. And then number 5, I guess kind of a wild card. Someone actually guessed. I mean, I guess they didn't guess the order, but they did guess that, in fact, Illinois is number 5, which surprises me. Ahead
Hmm.
of Pennsylvania, where I'm actually from. So, Pennsylvanians, you got to get those numbers up.
Yeah,
You're
that's
only about
interesting.
12,000 views behind Illinois, but you got to get those numbers up.
Oh, we can do that. We can make that happen.
I do want to see who. Apparently, I am not much loved in the Dakotas. North
Mm.
Dakota and South Dakota are consecutively the least viewed. Less than 1,000 people from South Dakota watched a Luke Miani video this year.
I think that's where I think you need to if you're gonna do any advertising, maybe you can target it there.
That's a good idea. I think we should really make the channel more, and really what we should do is make this entire podcast designed to just sort of appeal towards South Dakota, a state in the north central region of the United States, which is also part of the Great Plains, one of my favorite plains. I mean, they're called great for a reason.
Yeah.
Now, fun fact, South Dakota, which is a fantastic state, is named after the Lakota and Dakota Sioux Native American tribes.
Oh, very
So,
interesting.
one of my favorite tribes for sure. And you know what's really fun about South Dakota is that it's the 17th largest state, but also the 5th least populous. You know what that means? Lots of space.
Yeah, that's I'll bet you could get a very large property for relatively cheap
A
compared
great
to
value for
other
sure.
place. Great
One of
value.
my
We
other
love.
favorite things about South Dakota is how it's bordered by North Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Montana. That's a
Those are some great places, but except for North Dakota, I don't think any of those other places compare to South
I
Dakota. You
agree.
know,
I would say that North Dakota is the only one that really holds a candle.
exactly.
Holds a candle above it specifically.
Right, right.
Right. Should we get started?
Yes, I think
I
we've
think
had
we've
enough Dakota talk.
successfully courted the Dakotas.
Yes.
All right. Welcome to Dark Mode, a podcast that brings you sage advice from two technology experts. And that's not just what we call ourselves, it's what our moms tell people when the M2 Max hit the shelves, and no one can buy them because they're going to be very hard to get. I'm your host, Luke Miani.
And I'm your host, Noah Rubin. On this show, we take questions from listeners, attempt to answer them to varying degrees of success, and maybe even have a laugh or two along the way.
Ha ha ha. Now, I will actually say in the pre-show we were talking a lot about analytics, and it's a lot of fun. So I think we might revisit that because people are saying like, how many viewers do you have from Greenland? I think there was a while where I even had like a view. There was 1 month where I had a view from North Korea. That was a fun one. I was like, who
Interesting.
is risking life and limb to watch which MacBook should you buy in 2022?
Yeah.
But I think we have to start logically with a super chat that is quite timely because it is about the M2. So, Second City Saint says, "Hey Luke, number 1, was disappointed with the M2's single core performance. Actually, not so much since it's in Ultrabooks. Number 2, M2 Pro and Max will be on ARM v9, which is meant to be a big deal. My question is, why is it a big deal? Is it just 3 nanometer? Also, love the channel, watching from New York City." Great to have you with us. Great questions and a great place to start because we are just a couple days after WWDC. I honestly thought that this year was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I thought it was a great event. We got some good software updates across the board. I'd say more exciting than last year there, and we also got some hardware, which is always fun. And we got the MacBook Airs that we've been expecting for a while. So very good overall.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the MacBook Air. I think the M2 chip is, I mean, it's not revolutionary, right? And I don't think Apple was really positioning it as such. They seemed a little bit more casual about this than I would expect from them. Um, so I think that this is, a good upgrade to have, but it's nothing that's going to be completely changing the name of the game. And we can talk about why that is in a second. I do think the MacBook Air, bro, that thing is going to be absolutely killer. Like, just from looking at a couple of the media that had access to hands on with the device, dude, I mean, it looks like that. It's unbelievably thin. It's thinner than the original iPhone. It's actually thinner than the iPhone 14 will be at the
Yeah.
camera bump. So it is actually a MacBook Air. Unlike for the longest time, from like 2016 until pretty much now, the MacBook Air was either the same thickness or even slightly thicker than the MacBook Pro. But now, finally, the MacBook Air is actually an Air again. And I think it looks phenomenal.
Yeah, I love the design because I love the new MacBook Pro design looks so nice, and the Air is, basically the same design, just a lot thinner. And I don't mind the Pro being thick because it's a Pro
Mm-hmm.
computer and you need that. But the MacBook Air is super thin and super light, I guess, and it looks really nice, really nice.
And we also have to remember that this is, I mean, the MacBook Air is the best selling laptop Apple makes. And we're finally at a point, it's almost crazy to think about, but we are at a point now where as the new generation design language rolls out, it's an improvement over the previous one. In the 2015 to 2018 cycle with the old design, every time a computer got upgraded, it got worse because it was just like, I mean, yeah, the MacBook Air never had a touch bar. So for that reason, a lot of people liked it, but it was slow. It had a really whiny little fan that just sounded annoying. It was like all day long. It's really unpleasant. And it had the butterfly keyboard. It just, the MacBook Air, the previous generation, which was introduced in 2018, it just kind of sucked. It was the default Mac, but it wasn't popular because it was good. It was popular because it's a MacBook Air. It's the cheapest one.
Mhm.
But now you can buy the cheapest MacBook Air there is and be getting an absolutely phenomenal product. absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I'm assuming. I haven't used it yet, but based on the M1 MacBook Air, they'd have to really try to mess that up.
Yeah, I don't see that happening, but I definitely think, the when the MacBook Air with M1 came out, that was like the easiest computer to recommend as like a default computer for anyone
Yeah.
that needs a Mac or that wants a laptop basically. And if they don't need, even if they need it for more pro things, you could still use a
Mhm.
MacBook Air. But if you're not like super into it, like we are, MacBook Air is the easiest thing to recommend. And now this new one, again, easiest laptop to recommend, and it just it looks nicer, I think, than the old one, and it definitely has some nice upgrades. And the M2, take it or leave it, it is an improvement. It's not a huge improvement, but that's
Mhm.
okay. There's definitely some other upgrades that come with this computer, and it's just, yeah, it's a great one.
I have to say, I think the biggest thing that M1 and now hopefully M2 have done is make the entry level Apple devices not underpowered. For the longest time, Ultrabooks in general, and especially Apple's Ultrabooks, were fine. They were all right. They weren't designed to be boring business boxes. They weren't designed to be, plastic powerhouses that have a lot of spec and sound like the box that your fridge came in. Like they're not designed to be, anything to a compromise. But they did strike a point where, like, if you look at the 2020 MacBook Air, the one right before M1 that came out just a few months earlier, and every time I'm in a coffee shop and I see someone with one of those, I I feel for them. I really do. I'm like, damn, you mistimed it because that's really rough. It's just not enough. I mean, compared to the Intel days, it was normal, right? It came with a Core i3 dual core. It was fine. Or it might have been quad core. Who even knows? Who gives a shit? It was slow. But what the M1 chip did was it meant that you could buy the cheapest MacBook Air known to man and you could still fire up Final Cut. You could still fire up Blender and Photoshop and like you could do normal, reasonable amounts of professional tasks on on a MacBook Air that you just couldn't do before. You had to spend 2 grand to get passable performance, and the fans would melt your lap off. And now you don't have to do that. And I think the biggest thing for M2 is the media engine because that's something the M1 chip didn't have. And for everything that was great about the M1, I actually never switched full time to using it. I was still on my iMac Pro because I mean, obviously M1 and an 18 core iMac Pro aren't really designed to be on the same level, but M1, as great as it was, just didn't it wasn't fast enough in those applications. So by adding the media encoder, if you do video editing and you look at those 18% improvement, those 30% GPU improvements, it doesn't look like that much, but you add the media encoders to the mix, and I think that's going to make a really big difference.
Yeah, that is a good point, and there's definitely a lot more people, I would say, editing videos these days. A lot more people doing stuff on YouTube or even TikTok and the other ones. I know you can edit those videos on a computer and put them back, and I don't know
Yeah.
how many people do that, but I'm sure a lot of people do. So
Hmm.
there's definitely a lot of demand for good performance in video editing apps, whether it's Final Cut or even if you're just using iMovie, that's fine. But I think that they could take advantage of that. So it's a great upgrade to see. And I think in general, this at least with we're talking about the Intel MacBook Air versus the M1 MacBook Air. I think the M1 MacBook Air was the first time. It was a really big leap for a MacBook Air, and it's like the very first, I guess, sort of definitive MacBook Air. And what I mean is,
Yeah.
obviously, the original one where Steve Jobs, pulled it out of the manila envelope, like that was a huge deal and a really cool computer. But up until the M1, it's always been, underpowered, like you said, and battery life has always suffered as well because of that.
True.
And I feel like the M1 MacBook Air, even though that was same design as before, and even now the M2 MacBook Air with the new design, it's truly it's super thin, but it has amazing battery life and no fans. So it's really like it's a really big leap for the MacBook Air.
Now that you mention it, Noah, I think it's actually possible. And this might be a stretch, but I'll defend my position here.
Okay.
The M1 MacBook Air was the first great MacBook Air in the entire MacBook Air's history. That's my take. Thoughts?
I think that's fair. I mean, you can look at the original MacBook Air, which was really cool, but there were so many sacrifices. It had like an iPod hard drive in it, right? The original one.
Yeah, 4,200 RPM, baby. It took like 5
Yeah.
minutes to boot when new.
Yeah. And then obviously, it got better from there. But the MacBook Air, I feel like there were always sacrifices until
Mhm.
the M1, and now it's a lot less of that. So I kind of agree with you. I don't know if that's too crazy of a statement to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think the original MacBook Air was the worst MacBook Air because, I mean, first of all, it had an iPod hard drive, so it was unusably slow. It had
Yeah.
2 gigabytes of RAM, which was soldered, so you couldn't do anything about that.
Mm.
The hard drive, by the way, was only like 120 gigs, which,
Yep.
yeah, it was 2008, but also still. Um, it had a dual core processor where they basically chopped off bits of the PCB to make it smaller. And it was so slow that because there was like no cooling in the MacBook Air, it actually throttled and would disable one of the cores. So it was a dual core chip, except for anytime you needed the second core, it was too hot and it would down to a single core chip. So
Oh,
even when it was brand new, it was ungodly slow with 2 gigabytes of soldered RAM. It's like it was unbelievable. And do you know what, Noah? Do you know how much it cost when it was
remind
new?
me. Remind me.
It started at $17.99. And I don't know if you know, but inflation. And so let me just run this real quick. It started at $17.99. That's $2,442 today.
Oh wow.
So you were paying MacBook Pro money and you got a single core laptop with one USB port in 2008 with an iPod hard drive. It was terrible. And so then they fixed it. 2010, it got the redesign. Then in 2012, they did a thinner version with the second generation of MagSafe, and that lasted all the way up until 2017. But here's the thing. I wouldn't even consider I wouldn't call that a great generation either. Because in 2010, with a Core 2 Duo, they were still about as expensive as a MacBook Pro. So you weren't getting a cheaper computer, but they lacked the upgradability because of soldered RAM. So when you compare that to a unibody MacBook Pro, the unibody MacBook Pro was arguably a better deal. And then by 2013, 14, 15, that generation was good, but it started with 4 gigs of RAM. So the cheapest one wasn't super viable. And it was only like $200 less than a Retina MacBook Pro. And the Retina MacBook Pro was nearly as thin, way more powerful, Retina display, much better looking. So, and then of course, you get to 2016, 2017, the thing was so ancient, they had no business selling it for that long. So, I think if you look back over the entire MacBook Air's history, it has never been in a position of being the best option. It was always the cheapest option. Maybe it was the thinnest, maybe it was the lightest, but I don't think, maybe it's retrospects talking, but I really don't think that it was ever that great until M1.
I think that's fair. And I'm just reflecting a bit because we both had MacBook Airs from 2013 to 2017,
Yeah.
from our high school. Um, 2013 to 2017, right? I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yes.
So we had those for about 4 years, and they were fine for school work, basic school stuff. I don't remember how great the battery life was. Probably it was decent,
It was
but
all
yeah,
right.
yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I guess I had a 2011 MacBook Pro at the time, so I can't even really talk because I don't know. But those computers were
True.
fine. But I would say, truly great, great one. The M1 was the first, yeah, because it always felt like the MacBook Air. Like you'd get the MacBook Air if you couldn't get the MacBook Pro, or like it's like the MacBook Pro is the better one. But if you don't want to get it, or if you really just care about something that's super portable and you don't need the power, then you can get the Air. But now it's like the Air is just so good that it's like you only get the Pro if you really really want it for some reason, or you really need it. The Air is
Mm.
just a lot easier to recommend, not just as like oh, if you're not going to get the Pro, get the Air. But like, don't get the Pro. You probably don't need it. Just get the Air. It's
Yeah, that
probably
is
just easier.
something that the only I will say a couple people have pointed out that in 2010 and 2011, the MacBook Air was in a really good spot because you got the higher res screen, 1440 by 900 versus 1280 by 800. It also had SSD, whereas the unibodies were still on hard drives at that point. So I guess 2011, I would say I would agree with that 2011 it was good, but that's only because the MacBook Pro was lagging at that point. That was the very end of its generation. And so I guess you could sort of liken that to the M1 MacBook Air versus the 16-inch Intel MacBook Pro, right? Where it just hadn't gotten updated yet.
Hmm.
So you could argue that the 2011 MacBook Air was the best version of the MacBook Air when you compare it to what it was selling alongside. But even then, I would say that the Apple Silicon offerings are better because even back in 2010 and 2011, the limitations on the CPUs to go into those devices were a bigger difference than they are now. Like fanless M1 versus fan M1 really doesn't make that much of a difference. And when you compare that to the pretty dicey lower end weak CPUs from back in the day, I would say that M1 is still the biggest upgrade to the MacBook Air. I mean, every single person that I know that says, "Hey, I need a new Mac." I just blanket statement buy a MacBook Air. That has never
Yep.
been true before. I've always been like, well, what do you need? Should we go for used? Maybe refurbished would be good. Like I was always trying to find people the best option for getting them the most power and the least money. And now it's so easy. You just say, hey, you need an M1. Just buy it and you're done.
Yeah, that's a really good point because yeah, there was a time in the butterfly keyboard era, I guess we could
Yeah.
we could call it, where it was, first of all, it was harder to recommend those computers, and second of all, that was a time when the 2015 MacBook Pro
Mm,
was still potentially viable, and maybe even a unibody if you really wanted to go back there and make some upgrades to it, maybe, but definitely the 2015. And now I feel like we're at the point where the 2015 is 7 years old, I guess, or coming up on 7 years old. And so that's a little bit too old. And then even refurbished, you don't want to go back to the Intel, the butterfly keyboard ones. You
yeah.
probably don't want to go back to those. But the M1 is just so easy to recommend. So it's not even, so it's exactly what you said. It's not even the new MacBook Pro versus the new MacBook Air. Very easy to recommend the new Air. But even getting a new MacBook Air versus something refurbished, it's again, it's so easy to recommend the new one, and it's worth the extra money if it's going to cost a little more.
I mean, if you take a look at the M1 MacBook Air compared to any Intel MacBook Pro in even in the same price category, it's faster. The MacBook Air is going to be faster than any 15-inch MacBook Pro, with the only exception being the 2019 Core i9 model. So only the very, very best Intel MacBook Pro is even within the same realm as the M1 MacBook Air. And it's actually a good point that you bring up, Noah, about the butterfly keyboard days, because I mean, it's weird to think that that was 3 years ago now is when we were like really in the butterfly keyboard days. And a lot of people have said, like, Luke, why don't you go back to the videos that you used to make about, like, buying used instead of new, refurbing off of eBay to get a good deal, and like, why don't you make videos like you used to? And the reason is those videos aren't viable anymore because those types of deals don't make sense anymore. Right, if you go back to 2019, right? Let's all rewind, put on your little time traveling hats, right? What did the Mac landscape look like in 2019? Well, 2019 was the last year where butterfly keyboard Macs were coming out, right? So at the beginning of the year, you had the MacBook Pro update that got updated in like May. And so that's when we got the 8-core i9s, and they sort of kind of fixed thermal throttling. So that was a decent upgrade. But again, just a spec bump, right? Then the base model 13-inch MacBook Pro got the Touch Bar and quad-core chips, and they replaced the dual-core models. And then there was a MacBook Air that had like a brighter screen, and that's about it. And then by the end of the year, we had the 16-inch MacBook Pro, right? So if you take the context of that year and that time frame, what the Mac looked like, it made a lot of sense to buy older things, because with the exception of that 8-core i9 MacBook Pro, you could get most of the same performance out of a 2015 that you could out of a brand new one, but for half the price and with upgradable storage. And you could buy a cheese grater Mac Pro and hot rod it, because the new one, the trash can was still current until December of that year. And the Mac Mini, you could still buy a 2012 because the at that point very recent 2018 was pretty comparable. Like, all of those things are not really possible now, because where we are right now, as Noah pointed out, the favorite, the darling MacBook Pro, the mid 2015, is 7 years old as of last month. So it's a 7-year-old computer. And it's starting to feel old. I have two of them. They look a little old now with those thick bezels. The speakers are not good. The microphones are not good. The battery life is not good. And the performance is drastically behind even that of an M1 MacBook. Same with the graphics. Like, an M1 MacBook Air is a much faster computer. And so right now, when you look at the situation where it's like, oh, don't buy something new, buy used and you'll save some money. It's like, yeah, maybe you'll save $300, but it's half the capabilities. So we are in this weird time where if you want the best value, you want a new Mac.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that we're at the beginning of a new generation, and
Yeah.
obviously, even in 2016 when we were going to the Touch Bar and butterfly keyboard era or generation, even then, go back to the previous generation, 2015, those were still good. This was a very drastic generational shift, obviously going from Intel to Apple Silicon. But we are starting to see, now that the M2 MacBook Air is coming out, maybe the prices of the M1 MacBook Airs will drop. And I know they're in the refurb store as well, and you can look on
Hmm.
eBay. And obviously there are fewer opportunities to do upgrades or anything. You could do a little bit with the 2015. If you go back to the unibody, you had even more options there. So a bit less of that. But as we move into this generation a little bit, then you could start looking for used. You could look at an M1 MacBook Air at that point. But yeah, it's kind of hard to go, back further than the Apple Silicon generation, unless you explicitly need an Intel machine for some reason. It's really hard to go back beyond that barrier.
It's interesting though. I mean, we are in a point now, and honestly, it dawned on me once the M1 stuff came out. Obviously, I was so excited to look at it, but then I started realizing, oh, wait a minute, my whole like business model relied on buying used, hot rodding old Macs and stuff. That was based entirely on a sentiment of being unhappy with the way Apple was handling the Mac. That's how I built my entire channel. Was on people didn't like what Apple was doing now, so they wanted to make the most of what Apple used to do in the past. And so I've had a very good couple of years building a channel from 0 to 100 200K before Apple Silicon came out, based 100% on people's want to save money by not giving Apple directly money for the stuff that they were doing at the time, which was not good. So it is weird now to be in this point where the smart money is in Apple Silicon, but I think the next step is going to be once we start getting into this M2 generation and then specifically more into M3, then I think we might even start to get back some of those used, refurbished, repair type videos because Apple Silicon needs time to mature for good deals to start, you know, existing and for it to be worth comparing. You're going to see some of that next month, frankly. I'm going to be pretty tough on M2 comparing it to M1. And I think someone brought up actually, um, they were wondering question on upgrading to M2 from M1 or waiting for M3. And then also, I guess we also had that super chat back at the beginning that was wondering about ARM v9, 3 nanometer, that sort of thing. So my quick take on this, and let me know if you agree, Noah, would be if you're already on Apple Silicon, M2 is probably going to be a skip.
Yeah, it definitely seems the only time that you'd even think about it is if you're on a plain old M1. So you're on
Mm,
one of those launch, and I guess there's not even a Mac Mini with M2. So if you're on a launch MacBook Pro or launch MacBook Air, an M1, model of those, if you don't want the new design of the MacBook Air,
true.
then yes, M2, it doesn't seem like it's that big of an upgrade. And I think that M1 is already very capable, and it already has great battery life. So I would definitely hold out. And I think that we'll start to see that where these computers are going to last even longer than, and obviously some people keep their computers for longer than other people do. But I think that in general, these computers are going to start lasting longer, like we've seen with the trend with iPhones and iPads and some other products.
Yeah. I think Apple's definitely going to have to contend with that because the problem with making devices really great is that people don't need to upgrade them. I mean, you look at the MacBook Pro, the mid 2015 one, Apple made a MacBook that was so good that people were sitting there for 5-6 years like, nah, I don't need any of that. And so they finally got people to upgrade with the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. They finally said, okay, we'll give you what you want. We'll bring that generation back effectively, but with all of the modern accoutrement that you could want. And people are like, okay, all right, you got me.
Mm-hmm.
But are they going to be in the same situation again? Are they going to be stuck, with people for 6 years that won't upgrade, and then they're going to have to start pulling out gimmicks and stuff and getting controversial? I hope not.
It's possible, and that's what the other super chat, we had a super chat from Cole Weathers about the iPad OS updates, and we can
Oh,
get into
yes.
that before we finish. But I guess just to briefly bring up, the iPad had that problem, and it
Oh,
still
yeah, big
does.
time.
And I guess the one thing is, so like Stage Manager does not work on iPads that don't have an M1 chip in them. So
Mm-hmm.
it won't work on my 2018 iPad Pro. Is that enough reason for me to upgrade? No, it's still not enough of a reason, unfortunately. But that's another reason, and maybe some people will be tempted or convinced into upgrading, and maybe next year Apple will come out with another reason. So they got to start doing things like that to get people to upgrade.
So, do you want to know the explanation that Apple gave for why you need M1 to use Stage Manager?
I think I did hear about this, and I wanted to discuss it. So yeah, so what? Go for it.
Yeah, we'll come back to M3 towards the end of the show.
Okay.
We'll talk about iPads now, because that was the other thing. Dub, right? We got software, right? So let's talk about Stage Manager, because I have a lot of thoughts. I've
Hmm.
been using it. Now, Apple has said, and I don't know, I'm going to read this with a healthy dose of sarcasm in my voice. As a resource intensive environment, Apple reasoned that it requires the power of the M1 processor because of the capability of the M1 to use fast memory swapping. That is what Apple claimed. They said, oh, you need the memory swap to use all of this stuff, you guys. You need it. You need it. I don't know if I buy that. Because here's the thing, folks. You don't need Apple Silicon to use Stage Manager on the Mac. So, look, macOS Ventura, as we know, supports Intel Macs. They don't have fast memory swap. And in fact, I'm looking at the supported list here. You need a 2017 12-inch MacBook that can run macOS Ventura. That has a dual core M3 CPU. That thing is less powerful than an Apple Watch, and it can run Stage Manager. So I'm sorry, but spare me well, you see, the 2018 iPads just aren't as technologically advanced to allow us to put the application windows in little tiny things on the side. We just needed more power for that.
Yeah, I don't know, because like if you look at the iPad, iOS 15 iPad, right? You can have two apps running in split screen, and you can have a
Yep.
third app that slides over, and that's totally fine. And you can, you don't have Stage Manager necessarily, but you can have, you could put two apps together and then get rid of that, and then put another two apps together and close that, and put another two apps together, and you can go into your multitasking, and you can switch between these groups of two apps, which is a less advanced version of Stage Manager. But in general, I don't see why you couldn't have a bunch of windows, and maybe the performance is going to be a little bit slower. Maybe the apps will have to be backgrounded more aggressively. So
Mm-hmm.
it'll be a little bit slower if you switch to a different like stack or whatever. I haven't used any of the betas actually, so I'm not
Whoa,
super familiar.
that's a first.
But I know. But whatever the stacks on the side, maybe if you switch between stacks, it would be a little bit slower. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it does kind of seem like I'm not sure how much I buy the excuse, and I will be really curious if we get a jailbreak for this. I'm sure that one of the
Mm.
first things will be a tweak. I'm sure it's a software setting, and there will be a jailbreak tweak that will enable native Stage Manager on older devices,
Oh
and I
yeah.
hope that happens. And I'd be curious to see how it runs.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Uh yeah, my experience with Stage Manager was essentially, uh-oh, Apple cannot figure out how to make the iPad usable. They
Oh no.
Cuz Stage Manager on the Mac feels kind of pointless.
Yeah,
Like
that's
it's
what I
cool,
yeah.
but I don't really see why I would need to do that. Like I can just minimize windows, I can set up multiple desktops. Like it's a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. I think it was developed with the iPad in mind. And the fact that you can have the same experience on the Mac and the iPad I guess that's good, right? It's consistent. The problem is on the iPad it doesn't really work all that well. I mean, number 1, the biggest issue by far is it doesn't allow you to have 3 actively visible windows. And that in a way is actually a step back from before, because you could have the side by side and then the weird little floating boy that you could swipe off and back and forth from, you could hide it, bring it back, hide it, bring it back, right?
Mhm.
I honestly think that that is better than using Stage Manager, because
Hmm.
Stage Manager does not give you any additional steps, right? It you can still put 2 windows side by side. But if anything, it's more inconvenient to resize them, because you have to, rather than just drag that bar down the middle, you have to resize each one of them to fit. And then if you do have a third application, it's either completely hidden behind them or it's like weird and off to the side, and then you have to tap it. And it honestly is worse than what it was before. And most of that is just because when you have the Stage Manager interface with the dock and the applications off to the left, it takes up so much screen real estate that even on a 12.9-inch, the windows that you can actually have open are tiny. And I'm like, what is the point of carrying around a 13-inch tablet with the case that makes it heavier than a 13-inch MacBook Pro if it's going to be unusably tiny windows that don't resize easily, because it keeps trying to like figure out what you want and it won't just let you drag a corner like you can on a Mac, and it's just frustrating.
Yeah, that sounds not super great. And I have a couple of questions for you because
Yeah, shoot.
I haven't tried any of these out, but based on the keynote, I got some impressions. So if you so on the Mac, did
Mhm.
they get rid of anything like the expose and the multiple desktops? Is all of that still there?
Yes.
So they just added Stage Manager, but everything else still exists as it did.
Yes.
That to me seems like really silly. I don't see what Stage
Mhm.
Manager adds that we couldn't do before.
I mean, I guess you could argue that if you have a desktop that is cluttered up with a bunch of apps, the utility for Stage Manager is, I mean, if I'm just looking at my dock over here, if I have Safari, messages, photos, calendar, notes, pages, and numbers all open at once, what would I mean, what would you do to make that more manageable if you have those 6 applications open?
If I did, and for me personally, I usually have very few applications open, and I only use a single desktop all the time. But if I had
Weird.
those applications open, I know we've had this discussion
You
before.
have
I always use a
64
single
gigs of
desktop.
RAM and you don't
Yeah,
use
yeah.
more than 2 apps?
Well, okay, I do, but I usually don't have a bunch of apps open at once. I'm very organized with my with that kind of stuff. But if I had to have all of these apps open, I feel like multiple desktops would just. It seems like Stage Manager is basically multiple desktops, but like
Mhm.
each Stage Manager stack or whatever they're called is essentially a different desktop. That's what it seems like to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that I would agree. Because like, if I had pages, numbers, notes, calendar, messages, and Safari open, then typically what I would do, and the reason I bring that up is because I quite frequently have those 6 applications open. So usually what I'll do is have Safari in full screen on its own side. And then I'll have a desktop to the left and to the right of Safari. So to the left, I would put messages and calendar. To the right, I would put notes and pages and numbers, something like that, where I like to just arrange things in a logical way. Safari, full screen in the middle. And then whatever I'm doing in Safari, I have a swipe to the right or a swipe to the left to get to what I need. It's simple, it's intuitive. I can arrange the windows the way that they want. I turn off automatic desktop rearrangement because that is a stupid feature only found useful by idiots. Okay? Why would I want. Sorry, I have to derail this conversation about Stage Manager to yell at Apple for even daring to make a feature where they will automatically rearrange your desktops based on usage. Why would I possibly want you to move things around when I've put them there? If I put something there, why would you say, oh, let me move that? No, idiot. I put it there because that's where I want it to be. And it's always moving stuff around. It always puts Final Cut Pro at the end and it puts Safari at the beginning. And I'm like, why would I want 3 desktops between those things? I don't get why they thought that was a good feature. Why would anyone want that?
Yeah, it seems like one of those features that it sounds good. They're like, oh, we're gonna, you'll get what you want. We'll order it in a logical way, and what you need, it will be there. But obviously, then you lose like the muscle memory or just even knowing, because like then you don't know where it is and you have to go look for it. And just one of those. It makes me think of like the device switching for the AirPods. It's like one of those features that they're trying to do too much for you.
AirPods device switching is the stupidest feature known to man. It's even stupider than the desktop thing. If I wanted my sound to switch from the device where audio is playing to a device where audio is not, then I would tell it to do that. If I was watching a movie and I'm 43 minutes into it with 57 minutes to go, and I pull out my phone and a Twitter ad automatically plays, why do you think that I would want to hear that instead? What could possibly prompt any sort of an intelligence logic loop in your program to think, yes, this 47 minutes into movie must wait because a progressive ad is playing in line on a Twitter feed on a phone that was off? It's so stupid.
Yes, it is. I think I don't encounter it as much as you do because I'm not as heated about it. But I definitely think that there are some features where Apple is trying too hard to be helpful, and it goes the opposite way.
Bro, this comment: least liked Apple things, AirPod auto switching, and anything on contacts, phone numbers. Brother, do I have a story for you, because my contacts are a goddamn nightmare.
Oh no.
It's a nightmare, dude. And I don't know how this happened. I don't know how this happened at all. But every single one of my contacts is entered at least 6 times.
Really?
Yes, every single one of my contacts has been duplicated or sextuplicated at least.
Wow.
At bare minimum. You know how it makes like a contact for yourself?
Yeah.
Right? That's a reasonable thing to do. Look how many Luke Mianis are in my fucking phone.
Oh my god.
And that's not even all of them. Look, it keeps going. There's so many. Why? I didn't make any of these.
Wow, that is bad. That's way too many Luke Meon. I mean, one is already a lot. That's just too
There's
many.
22 Luke Miani contacts in my own phone. Let me see how many Noahs there are in here. There's 9 of you.
Oh no.
And they're all the same. They have the same picture. They have the same company name, Idiot Incorporated, of course.
Oh, I didn't know that actually. I didn't know that was my I knew about the food emojis in the picture, but I didn't know about the company.
Yeah, your company
That's a
is
good
Idiot
one.
Inc.
It's
Oh
hilarious.
my. There's 5 contacts in here for Barack Obama.
You have his phone number?
Apparently so.
Wow.
Um there's contacts in here from, look, this one is called Mac owner with no actual information. That was from like
Nice.
some Mac that I logged into with my Apple ID, and it was like, let me create a contact with nothing in it. That's what you want. Oh my god.
Nice.
And I don't get this because like a lot of these are contacts that I've had for like a long time, like family members, stuff that was back in the iPhone 5 days. But some of the contacts are from like a year or 2 years ago or even earlier this year, and they're duplicated and triplicated and
Hmm.
octuplicated. Why? What causes this to happen and how does it stop? Because they're all the same contacts. Why does it not? Why if they have gone to all such great lengths to develop computer logic that can switch the AirPods from the sound that I'm listening to a sound that I don't want to listen to. If they spent all that time making that, why couldn't they make a thing that says, huh, this guy has 7 identical contacts? Maybe they're the same person. Maybe I could combine them. Or maybe you could not duplicate the contacts. Why does it do that? No, what causes that to happen? What possible, like, there is nothing that I could possibly do wrong that would cause it to create additional contacts for no reason. I don't understand.
I have a theory. And first of all, I want to point out I don't think the contact app has been like redesigned or really updated since iOS 1 or iPhone OS 1. Has it
Yeah,
really
that's probably
changed
true.
at all? I don't I think it looks the exact same pretty much.
Yeah.
But my theory is that this is a very bad or a very slow way for Apple to slowly consume all of your iCloud storage so that you have to buy more. I think they're playing a long
Interesting.
game with this. That's what I think.
Now that is curious. Someone also said that there was a way to merge. Someone said the merge section in contacts will fit that easy. We'll fix that easily. I don't see where, how do you do that?
I think
Is
you
that a
can
thing?
do it on the Mac, but I don't think you can do it on the iPhone.
Bro, what even? So on iCloud, yeah, on the iPhone in the settings app, the contacts only allow you to like do setting Siri and search. Um, you can add accounts, and then it just has like display order and stuff. So that's not very helpful. But in the actual contacts app, you can go to groups, and the groups that I have are all iCloud, and then 2 that just say card. Like it's just blank. It's just a placeholder name, bro.
Yeah, I'm taking a quick look on con like so on the Mac app, you can search for duplicates there. Oh my Apple Inc.
I have like 20 Apple Inc.
Nice. I don't know if you can do it on the iPhone. Someone said maybe iOS 16 is getting that feature. Maybe you can do it now. I'm not
I
sure,
hope.
but But I did not realize your contacts were that much of a mess. That's
Are
bad.
yours like that? Am I like, does anyone else have this problem where it just makes a bajillion different copies of all your contacts?
Mine are pretty much fine. I have some duplicates, but it's because LinkedIn like generated a bunch of contacts
Mm,
with just LinkedIn. Like
that's
so
rough.
I have to go in and delete all the LinkedIn contacts, but other than that, mine are fine. So I haven't had your problem.
I'm still trying to find where the option for condensing them is. I don't see it.
Are you on the Mac?
Yeah.
It's under at the top like menu. It's under card, and then
Look for duplicates.
yeah.
Gee, let's see if it'll find any. Would you like to guess how many duplicate contacts I have?
Like a couple hundred. I don't know.
Keep in mind, I'm a normal human being who doesn't have, like, I don't know, I don't have a ton of contacts, right? I
Okay,
don't have that many people that I would, we're talking about using the phone or texting, right? Like, that's not even all the people that I know, because a
true.
lot of that's going to be on other social media. So, how many contacts do you think are duplicate?
I mean, judging by the thing that we saw, it's got to be at least 100 or 200. I don't know.
574.
Oh wow, yeah, that's bad.
574 duplicate contacts. So let me go ahead and merge these. And by the way, this doesn't even count. Some of these are all just straight duplicates, not necessarily ones that have the same name but have different information. So like if one of them was duplicated and has a phone number and then a different one has that and an address or something, that wouldn't even count as a duplicate here. So 574 just pure duplicates. All right, I'm merging duplicated data now. Oh my god, this is so much better. Oh, wait, I have 211 contacts. That's kind of a lot. I'm kind of popular.
Wow,
Did you know that? It's pretty cool.
I I'm surprised.
Never mind that some of these are people that I like went to middle school with and haven't spoken to in 10 years, but don't worry about that.
Yep. Yeah.
574, geez. Anyway, so yeah, Stage Manager is not that good. Brought it back.
Yes. I don't know. It seems weird on the Mac to just kind of drop it in there and be like, "Hey, here's another way that you can manage, I guess if you don't like what you have, but I do appreciate that you can turn it off." And to be honest with you, I'll probably try it out and then turn it off, but
Oh
we'll
yeah.
see.
I mean, it's Stage Manager has to be toggled. It's never on by default.
Okay.
So
That's good, I
it's,
guess.
and honestly, I think it's a little clunky. Like you go to Control Center and then you can click the thing and it turns it on. You're like, okay, cool. To turn it off again, though, it's not a Control Center toggle. You have to, like, when it's on, you click on it and then that goes into that menu where you can toggle a switch, like the iPhone little like oval switch. Click that to turn it off, and then 2 clicks to get back out. So
Hmm.
it's, I don't know, it's a little bit irritating to go in and out of Stage Manager, but to be honest, I don't think you're really going to need to, because I mean, I guess that it gives you a little bit of like instant organization. And I guess if you're a one desktop person and you open up a lot of applications, then it can reduce visual clutter. That's pretty much the only thing I could really say for it. And on the iPad, I think it's genuinely worse than it was before, because, and I kind of feel like an idiot for that, to be honest, because Noah, we said we just want resizable windows. And then Apple was like, sure, but also we're going to throw in a little curveball of they're bad.
Yeah, they kind of gave us a little bit They went a little bit further than maybe we wanted. But I wanted to ask, on the iPad, can you have a full screen? I guess you can have one window in full screen, right? But could you still do the side by side full screen, or is that not possible anymore?
Yeah, so as with on the Mac, in the iPad, Stage Manager is a control center toggle and it doesn't replace anything. So
Okay.
you can have full screen apps, and in fact, you can go from within Stage Manager. You can tap on the top of it and pull it into full screen, or you can, if you have a Stage Manager window, one on its own, if you have stuff on the side and the dock on the bottom, if you drag out the corner of that window to fill up the screen, it'll push everything else off.
Okay.
And you'll have like the little rounded like screen grabby corner grabby down there, and you can pull it back, but you can go from Stage Manager to full screen. However, with Stage Manager open, the little floaty window that hides off to the side goes away. Not just you can't get it out of there, but whatever is in there, if Stage Manager is on, you cannot get back.
Hmm.
Like if I open up a new Safari tab and I go to your YouTube channel and I put that in the little floaty window and it's hidden, when I open Stage Manager, as long as Stage Manager is open, I cannot get that tab.
Oh, that's annoying.
Yeah. And like even if you full screen an application, you can't do it. It doesn't work. You also can't like add. I was not able to get another application added to a full screen application while Stage Manager was active. Like you had to exit Stage Manager, then do it.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe those quirks will be fixed, or maybe it's on purpose. But and I guess
Mm,
it's a good thing that you can still do things the old way if you prefer. But I guess, yeah, if you have Stage Manager, and like you said, there's a lot of well, Chrome, I guess it's called, but a lot of like interface elements that are on the screen, and then the
hmm
windows themselves are really small. That doesn't, especially on the 11-inch iPad Pro, that does not seem like a great experience. And like when we saw it in the
hmm
keynote, we saw it on these like giant screens, and
Exactly.
or even on our desktop, we saw a video of it, and I think it would probably be very different on an actual iPad.
I don't have a compatible 11-inch iPad to test it on, but I cannot imagine any utility to it. Because I mean, you're losing so much space with the UI, so much space. Like you're literally, if you want to keep the UI open, which is kind of the only real difference of Stage Manager, then you're losing about 30% of your screen real estate. So your 11-inch iPad is already down to like a 7-inch actual usable screen space. And like you can have the windows float and not be the full size of the screen, but why would you want that? On a Mac, it makes sense because certain windows don't need to be very big. Like I can have a messages window that's really tiny and it can hide off to the side, and I can have it peeking out behind something. It doesn't have to take up that much space. But on an iPad, there aren't that many applications that you would want to be any smaller because you're already tight on screen real estate. So it just doesn't really work. I really wish Apple could figure it out because the iPad is such a fantastic piece of hardware. But the more we go through this, the more I really genuinely am starting to think they should just merge Mac OS and iPad OS.
Yeah, I guess they're kind of like, I mean, if you look at Stage Manager, got brought to both of them. And from what I can tell, it kind of makes both of them worse. Like it's just
Yeah.
a worse, like, and maybe that's even an argument against merging them, because it's like, Mac OS and iPad OS had their own
Mm,
multitasking schemes. And if we're saying that both of those work better than Stage Manager, which is available on both, then maybe that's a reason to not merge them, or maybe
that's a
Apple
good
can
point.
come up with something better. I don't know.
Okay, maybe not merge. I think if I and obviously, we're just armchair commentators. That's not a word.
Commentators.
Yeah. We're just armchair commentatorists, tater tots.
Uh-huh.
And so we can't possibly, solve the problem for Apple. Because Apple has a lot more people that are a lot smarter than us working around the clock to figure it out. But if I had to think of a way to make the iPad actually good, it would be to give it a desktop with the ability to put files and folders on it, because I think that's a pretty key part of the Mac. I don't like using files like the app. I think that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
goofy. Um, I would give it a desktop, and maybe I wouldn't give it the top bar, the top menu bar of the Mac, but I would give the applications a bar at the top when connected to a mouse and keyboard. So I would maybe have this be, I guess, sort of the pro mode that people were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you pop it off the stand and you're using it, bare bones, you're raw dogging the iPad, right? In that
Uh-huh.
case, it could, like, how you have your first desktop. I
Mm-hmm.
think if you connect it to a mouse and keyboard or a magic thingy mabob here, that it should pop out and have a screen before the desktop, and that, or before the first page of apps. That's your desktop. You can swipe just like you normally would to get back to your apps, kind of like Launchpad. And then on your desktop, you could click in the dock and it would open a window. You could resize those windows and they would all crucially stay where you put them. I think that's what it needs.
I think that would be interesting, especially because the iPad, I think the iPad home screen looks kind of goofy, and the
Mm-hmm.
widgets definitely help. But when you have, and especially on some devices, I think on the iPad Mini, it looked especially bad because there were huge, like blank space on the like all around
Yeah.
the icon. But like each icon itself is like a small little icon, and there's so much space around it, and like the widgets help, but you still can't place them wherever. It has to flow, left to right and top to bottom. There's
Mm-hmm.
just, I don't know. I feel like Apple could have done something for the home screen on the iPad that
I
would have been
agree.
helpful. Maybe something like what you said, but I think that could use some love.
You know what else could use some love, Noah?
What's that?
Our ability to cleanly and succinctly wrap up this show.
Yes, I think that could use a lot of love.
But for right now, what it could really use is a sign off from me, your host, Luke Miani.
And me, your host, Noah Rubin. Have a great night.